Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Forest Rangers, what are your downright creepy and unexplainable stories? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I have a friend who is a trail ranger, basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back as it's a 1-hour ATV ride. The friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He called out, and no one replied. As it was getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. Less than half a mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back, basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They told him they would, but it would be an hour. He asked if the other guy got back, and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long, he heard voices again. It's dark. He's not happy. The voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they were having trouble finding what path he might be on and hadn't left yet. He asked them just to get the other ranger to tell them about where they are because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said he still isn't back. About 3 more minutes go by, and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping maybe they can stop being drunk assholes and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes, he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call, and they said the other guy was found passed out, covered in vomit, and was being taken to the hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found a stand, so they have a general idea of where he is. Then the radio died. Then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about, picking up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take. I don't fucking care. You knew better," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters arguing over a kill. Then he heard the one shout something unintelligible, then silence, then bang, a gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that, he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half an hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and in it was a long dead man who had clearly been shot in the face. The thing was, it was a skeleton that was there for years, so either the argument he heard just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago. Small chance I'm the cause of one of the ranger's stories from about a decade or so ago. Was hunting public land with my dad, several miles from anything close to a trail. So the day goes by, and not much is going on. The weather is shitty, and I'm not hearing distant gunshots, so I reckon the deer aren't moving much. I radio to the old man that I'm going to head back, and we make plans to rendezvous where we had split up that morning. 20 or so minutes later, I was kneeling around the edge of a pond, stripping off all my bulky camo layers. I was just walking around, putting stuff in my bag while I listened to my earphones. I can't remember if I had taken my blaze orange hat off or not to remove my pullover, but I had all the appropriate gear to denote myself as a hunter in my possession. As I was digging through my bag, I thought I heard that faint bass sound of someone yelling, so I took off an earbud out and noticed that, crouched on the opposite edge of the pond, there was a long forest ranger kinda just watching me. I stood up but didn't wave, and I wasn't sure he had even yelled to me in the first place, so I didn't holler anything to him. We just kind of locked eyes for what felt like a few minutes. To be clear, we weren't doing anything illegal. My rifle was unloaded by that point, though slung over my shoulder, obscuring the fact the action was open, and we were following all laws and regulations. I hunched back over to my bag, pulled out my walkie, and radioed to my dad. We got company. My motives weren't nefarious. I just didn't want my dad to come bumbling down the hill and be surprised by a friendly law enforcement officer. When I looked back up, maybe 15 seconds later, the ranger was gone. I mean, flat the out gone. So eventually I meet back up with my dad and start to tell him about what happened. Yeah, as deep back in here as we are, he probably thought we were up to no good and hit the trail when he saw you on the radio. They got ambushed like that. As someone who gets nervous, anxious around cops, it never occurred to me that I could be causing similar anxiety in them. If you're reading this, DNR bro, I'd like to offer you a heartfelt my bad and keep up the good work. My grandpa had a hunting buddy in the 70s who was basically a hermit in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. He was staying with him in his cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains during a hunting trip. No running water, no electricity, miles away from the nearest town or paved road. His cabin was built on stilts and on an incline. It had a 10-foot balcony from the base of the bottom of the slits, with no stairs or ladders to climb up on. My grandpa claims that he knew this man for a long time and said that he didn't have the personality to lie. I've also known my grandpa to never be one to bullshit. One night, during the trip, they were relaxing at the cabin after a hunt, and his buddy told him that Sasquatch was in the area and to be careful going out at night. Thinking he was pulling his leg, my grandpa chuckled and didn't think much about it. His friend then put on a very serious face and grabbed a few pieces of fruit, bread, and jerky and placed them in a bowl. He took the bowl out onto the balcony and set it on the edge and said, "It'll be empty in the morning," and then went to bed. It was an open-floor, single-room cabin, about 300 square feet. My grandpa had a cot set up near the balcony window and was woken up in the middle of the night by rustling outside. He peeked through the windows and saw the bowl, empty, and to this day claims he saw 4 fingers resting on the edge of the balcony just before letting go. He never went hunting in that area again. You know, of all the, if you want to say conspiracy theories or ghost hunters or Bigfoot hunters or UFO hunters, maybe I just never took Sasquatch seriously, but maybe it's the most logical of all, or maybe it's ridiculous. You would think with all the people in the woods, at some point someone would have seen something that has a camera, but there's no real evidence. So you hear stories like this and you're like, there's got to be something logical. Maybe it was a hawk or I don't know, but maybe. I mean, why not? Can you rule it out? Weird. When I was a kid in the Colorado Rockies, I was taking my horse and a whole band of dogs. We had 2 labs, an Aussie, and a dachshund, to our pond by my grandparents' place. I decided it was a great idea to venture the back way through the thicker part of the pine forest. I knew the way, and so did the animals, horse included. About 5 minutes from the house, I was oblivious to the world and didn't notice that the dogs were no longer with me. When I finally decided to come back to the real world and noticed the missing dogs, I turned back since you don't go anywhere without them. They were basically my guardians and supervisors up there. I get about halfway back to the house, come up a small gully heavily filled with pines, and there's this huge tom cougar just staring at me, right in the path. I'm 8 at the time, a little guy, and a tasty morsel for this animal. Luckily, I had the horse, who upon seeing the animal, immediately bolted directly back to the pasture. The cat seemed to run after us, didn't really watch. We roll up into the drive, head toward the pasture, and I agree that this ends my adventures for the day. After I put the horses up, the dogs find me again, and we are walking back to the house. When they get really jumpy and timid, I stop and begin to look around. There's a large and old pine splitting the distance between the pasture and the house, and on the lowest branch, I see that damn tom again. Luckily, the presence of the dogs deterred any action, but I made it a point to pass far away from the tree, and as calmly as I can, I tell my grandpa what happened. He went outside, rifle in hand, and never found the bastard. To this day, I never venture out without a dog or a weapon, just in case. My cousin is a park ranger and told me this story. There was this woman that had gone missing in the forest. No biggie. It's a big place. He'll just drive around till he finds her. 4 hours later, they still didn't find her when they heard a blood-curdling scream. This guy had found the missing woman with her throat slit so deep my cousin wasn't sure what she had even classified as a throat. He restrained the guy that found her and called the police. Sadly, however, there's nothing he or I could find about the subject, and my cousin didn't follow up on it after they arrested the guy, so for all I know, he just found her and had nothing to do with it. I was in a forest camping out under the lovely forests of Jersey. We set up camp and were all chatting in our tents and left the fire up so we could tell some great scary stories. All was going well until we heard a rustling in the bush. Textbook scary story stuff. We all think it's one of our friends who hadn't come back from the potty break, but just as the bush was rustling, we see the outline of a person circling our tent. We call out for our friend, but the random person does not answer, and at this point, he stops in place. We all start getting freaked out, as the person we see from outside could not possibly be our friend due to the height difference. One of the members of the group lies, saying that we are armed, and kills him. A good minute goes by before we all hear what I can describe as the most shrill scream I've ever heard, and dude just up and leaves. The creepy part about this is that our friend who was out to the restroom says he heard said scream but saw no one around the camping area or even footprints or where the man should have been. We were also pretty deep into the woods as well, so it's not as if anyone who was just passing by could have found us, at least not easily. My dad spoke to a Chinese woman who lived as a forest survey person up in the mountains for the past 30 or so years. This is in Canada, about 5 years ago. An unofficial sort of person the government asked about when looking for forest fires or any sort of illegal shit, etc. She says that she's spotted multiple Sasquatch, and that they're quite intelligent and just don't want to interact with people, not even the young ones. But if she's out there, they're pretty chill about it because she grew up around that area and remembers seeing them from a young age. She had a totally straight look on her face, and my dad said she is one of the most rational people he's ever seen out there. He owned a strip of gold claim out the way at the time, and she said if he knew what was good, he should leave that land alone because digging it up would disturb a lot of shit in the area, and she wasn't sure it was a good idea. My dad wasn't so sure until he swore up and down he saw one himself, and she said, "That's the female one," and just went inside and left him out there to take the fuck off running. In the fall of 2017, I shot a deer right around dark at 5 miles out from my truck. I go back, get my gear off, and grab my cart. I get to the deer, gut it quick, and head out. Well, about 2 miles in, my deer cart breaks. The wheel snapped clean off. Now I had to sling the effer on my back. About that time, I heard some coyotes, I'd say 3 or 4, faintly on the gut pile. I go another mile before I take a break. I'm chilling there, listening to the yotes. When it hits me like a hard tap on the nuts, they were much louder and many more yips than earlier. Within a quarter mile, and here I am, sitting like a waffle, with no weapon but a hatchet and a gut knife, sitting next to the second course of their feast. Now, of course, the first 3 miles from my stand consist of fairly easy walking. Dry, some thick spots, but overall an easy walk. But the last 2, swampy as all hell, and thicker than a mother. I picked up, zigzagging through the swamp, running on adrenaline, not looking back, and easily dozen coyotes were about 100 feet away. I never once stopped and never once looked back. On the home stretch, I hopped the 5-foot gate with the deer on my back like it was nothing. Though I collapsed on the other side, nearly passing out, I heard the coyotes hit the fence within 10 seconds of my jump. They howled and snarled and screamed at me, who was clenching the knife, ready to meet my maker from the other side. And then, just like that, they were gone. The woods were silent, and I hobbled back to my truck and grabbed the deer. I called my dad and told him my story, and told him I was tired and was going to take a nap in the parking lot. I was bloody as hell, with scratches and cuts and bruises from the branches hitting my exposed face. So I took a nap and was woken by a tapping noise on my window and the bright light. I don't know who was more scared, me or the greenhorn DNR officer, wide-eyed, slack-jawed, and in baggy pants, staring at the monstrosity I was. I told him the story. He checked my info, and we had a good laugh, and I went on my merry way. Now, those who are going to ask why I didn't just drop my deer and let them have it, I don't know. It was only a 5-pointer, not very big, a very average deer. I'm just a stubborn stick who doesn't think things through thoroughly. But hey, the deer was yummy. And for the DNR officer that I have a new brown set of undies to, I've seen him on 3 occasions since, all 3 ice fishing. He calls me wild man and doesn't even check my information, nor does he check my fish. We talk quite a bit when we see each other. I consider him a friend, actually. I used to spend a lot of time in the forest near my neighborhood. It's a small strip of trees whose biggest inhabitant is a fox. I got into vulture culture, taxidermy, about a year ago. I've always been a fan of zoology, and being able to look at animals in a different way is incredibly interesting. When I was getting into it, the fox in the forest had just had kits and was hunting overtime to feed them. I started kind of an exchange where I'd pick up bones and such from around the den, and if I found fresh corpses elsewhere, I'd leave the meat around the den instead of wasting it. Unfortunately, this garnered me the reputation of outcast or horrible dead animal lady from most of the kids who liked to play in the forest, and noticed me carrying bags of rotting animal parts around. As far as I'm aware, none of them actually knew anything about me, aside from the rotting meat and the time I accidentally busted through with a bunch of live snakes, so that probably will cement their opinion on me. I work at a summer camp, taking kids on canoe trips for a few days at national parks. One night after setting up the campsite and quenching the fire, I was doing the last check of the campsite. I looked at the lake and saw this lone man paddling a canoe. I thought it was pretty strange, but it's not out of the ordinary, the only weird thing being that he was alone. He waved, so being the polite Canadian I am, I waved back. Went to bed in the staff tent, and everything was normal. I had a bit of trouble sleeping that night, so I decided to go stargazing, as that usually calms me down. I exit the tent and see this man on our campsite, looking through our tarps and bags. For what I don't know, maybe drugs or food, but that's not important. The stranger is by the campers I'm responsible for. We make eye contact, and this guy stands up. He is tall as all hell, and I'm quite short, so I quickly grab the first thing I can think of, a can of bear mace. This stuff is meant to kill a charging bear, so I hold it ready to spray and tell him to get out of my campsite. We don't really speak, just oh, I didn't see you guys. When he is leaving, I immediately wake up the other staff, and we make sure he leaves. We use our sat phone to call park rangers with our position, the guy's characteristics, and tell them the story. Without a doubt, the scariest moment I had on the job. I've learned not to fear animals, as for the most part, they're predictably dumb and not malicious. But people, on the other hand, the scariest and most dangerous thing to encounter out in the wilderness is a person. So we're at this camper near the Dover Lights in Arkansas. It's not the fanciest campsite, but we managed to find this guy that spends a lot of time out there, as much as legally allowed, while also working and apparently making a lot of cash. So he just vacations in the woods half the year. The guy offers to let my friend watch the place where he goes to visit his son. My friend automatically invites me and some other people to come hang out, and we spend a few days there drinking, smoking, fishing, and fucking around. All in all, pretty okay until my female friend gets super drunk and barges outside in the middle of the night buck naked to eat beans by the handful out of a cold pot. As someone who admires cleanliness, I follow her out and try to make sure she doesn't hurt herself while everyone else just laughs. So there she is covered in beans, and I'm trying to convince her to settle down and clean herself off with a towel when suddenly her head shoots up like a deer in headlights. She just glares at the trees around us. We're alone and it's pitch black, before literally growling and then sprinting into the woods. I have no idea what to do. I've completely lost sight of her, and she's naked in the woods by herself. A few failed attempts to call out to her, and I do the stupidest thing I could have done by following her. About 5 meters into complete darkness, I look down and see a faint light from someone's phone. Picking it up, I see it's in camera mode, and there are pictures of us, very recent pictures, all in creepy night vision mode, with some looking like they were taken from the window of the camper, and the last one is of my friend running directly toward the camera. Realizing what happened, I delete the pictures and drop the phone on a rock, crushing the screen with my foot. Still unable to find her, and freaking out, I double back to the camper for help, only to find her still very drunk in a lawn chair naked. Carrying her back inside, I let her boyfriend towel her off, and they both pass out, spooning on the bottom bunk. I never told them what really happened, and she didn't remember in the morning, but I did lock the door and wake up every hour just to keep an eye on things. So my dad is a forestry technician, and this happened to one of his coworkers. They were up doing some sort of job in the very most northerly part of Ontario. Anyways, it was the middle of the night, and she was half asleep and vaguely heard something outside her tent. Then she felt something push against her tent, and the zipper slowly opens. She opened her eyes and saw the head of a polar bear in her tent. Polar bears are far from the cuddly toys that you see, and they're known to be super aggressive and will hunt and eat people. She lay there paralyzed with fear, thinking that it was the end, and then slowly the bear retracted its head and left. My brother has a winter job closing parks. He drives around in a country vehicle and makes sure no one is in the parks before closing the gates. He does this from about 5 to 8 p.m., and it's pretty dark out. The other day he was closing one of the parks and saw a man hopping through the woods. The man then saw him and crouched down and just watched my brother do his closing duties. My brother laughed and went on to another park where he found a dead coyote frozen solid, standing up as if it were alive. Creepy shit. I'm not a forest ranger, but a native Alaskan who grew up in the sticks. Once I was out hunting with an uncle. Well, I was there anyways. I was 8 at the time. We had been trying to find a small moose for quite some time that we'd seen take off into the forest across a field. Everything seemed normal, except that the area was very quiet. Then again, we're 2 humans walking about, so we figured maybe the wildlife was just being cautious. Well, eventually we caught up to it at another clearing, and my uncle decided to take a shot as it was getting later, and we needed to get it skinned, gutted, and butchered before the sun went down. He hit it in the heart, and it only managed to stumble maybe another 60 feet to the edge of the forest. I complimented his shot, and we grabbed our gear and walked over. Now, before I tell you this next part, keep in mind that moose are weighed in the thousands of pounds generally. We're getting closer, and my uncle can't see the moose anymore. Weird, because we'd seen it fall, and we knew it had been hit mortally. We get to the location, and the thing is just gone. My uncle starts to enter the forest, and all my hairs suddenly raise on my entire body, and I made a whimper. I'm not a wuss, but I had a bad feeling. My uncle looks at me, annoyed and confused, and just maybe 30 feet away, we hear heavy breathing. The first thing we think is grizzly, so he pushes me behind himself and gets his gun ready and shouts as loud as he can. I don't know what it was, but it dropped King Moose from at least a couple of feet off the ground. We know because we heard the loud thud and tore off running in the other direction. It is dark in the understory, so we don't see much, but my uncle decides the thing can have the moose. We weren't about to stick around to find out what could lift a whole moose into the air and carry it. 10 years as a USFS forest ranger here. A couple of my favorite both involve fire patrol during the summer months, where we were enforcing fire restrictions. The first was a dude at a beautiful area camped next to a lake. About 100 feet from his camp was a giant reflective yellow sign that read, "No camping or fires within half a mile of the lake." When approached and asked if he'd seen the sign, he admitted that he saw it. Puzzled, I asked why he was camping there and why he had a campfire. He replied that he figured he was half a mile from the lake, so he should be fine. I kicked a stone into the water and informed him that he was only about 10 feet from the lake, and I was going to need his ID as I was going to issue him a citation. Another time, also on a late-night fire patrol, we drove past a designated day-use picnic area. This particular area had fire pits, benches, restrooms, and water. It was well developed. Right outside the picnic area was this old trail that led to a bridge site where the bridge was removed. Due to this, we had placed a carcinite signpost, slender brown fiberglass post, for informative stickers on the trail markers and warnings. This particular post had stickers on it that said "Area closed, no fires, stay on designated trails," and an American flag at the bottom. We roll up to a raging fire at the site. Fire so big and so close to the carcinite sign that my stickers are literally bubbling and starting to melt due to the heat. Pretty angrily, I asked who wanted to be responsible for this blatant violation. The oldest guy there says he'll take responsibility for the party, follows me to the truck, and proceeds to give me his ID. In his police badge holder. He was a local police officer. I was floored. I gave him a stern lecture about reading signage and ultimately damaging government property. Endless stories, though. Suicides, ATV accidents, bear attacks. Very sad. Far too many Boy Scout violations to count. Poachers, murders, public nudity, sex in public, underage, everything you can imagine. Life flight helicopters, forest fires, air tankers, fire crews, enough said there. But all in all, I truly missed the million-acre office. The woods, the trees, animal encounters, the occasional well-informed forest visitors, and the endless views, vistas, and sunsets. Getting paid to hike, mountain bike, dirt bike, motorcycle, snowmobile, jeep, and play outside for 10 years was clearly something I'll never forget. Not a forest ranger, but I used to live in a very rural area in my youth, and when I had just turned 18, I was helping with a family friend's security company. It was October, about 9 p.m., and we had just started the night shift of patrolling what was once a manor house. A little backstory on this place. Rumor had it that the house was cursed and haunted by demons and tortured souls alike. In the time it had been standing, it had been a simple place of residence, hotel, hospital, and nursing home, and was eventually left abandoned and derelict in the late 60s. In the 40 years it was abandoned, it had been broken into by kids and gangs and had occasionally been set on fire, all wanting to see this curse for themselves or believing it enough to want that place gone. I didn't bury the whole haunting thing, but the place certainly made me feel a little uneasy. Back to the story. It was dark like it always is at that time at the end of October. It was also cold, and usually the lights around the garden kept it light enough that we could see what we were doing without the need for torches. That was when the lights went out, all of them. That was weird, but not to worry. We had the flashlights on our phones, but our phone screens were flickering. Okay, that was super weird. And if stopped there, I probably would have gone home believing that there was some sort of issue with the electricity in and surrounding the house. Some areas are like that, especially in rural places. I live in a rural area now, and all the lights blow out and flicker a lot because the electrics just aren't that great. I wish I could say it stopped there. We heard screeching coming from the house. It didn't even sound human. I can't even describe it. But it was enough for your stomach to drop like the floor just collapsed beneath you and make your blood curdle. And for what must have been a solid 30 seconds, the inhuman screeching was accompanied by unintelligible whispers closer to us and the occasional shadow depicting various acts of suicide and self-mutilation. When we all determined that we did indeed experience what had just happened, we called the police about the disturbance and hightailed it out of there as soon as they arrived. No evidence of there being anyone in the house was found. No signs of a break-in, nothing. Our team of 4 people were the only people on the property. I haven't set foot in there since. However, the other guys did, and as far as I'm aware, they never had an incident like that since. During high school and college summers, I worked for Pike National Forest in Woodland Park, Colorado. Trail maintenance for ATVers, dirt bikers, hikers, bikers, etc. Amazing summer job. One summer when I was like 18, we were driving around patrolling on a rainy day, and we noticed a car with its windows down about 20 feet off the main road. We thought nothing of it and headed back. When it was still there the next 2 days after it had been raining all week, we stopped to check it out. On the car's front driver's seat are the keys to the car, a wallet, ID, and a few bucks in cash. On the passenger seat was a note. I opened it, and I'll never forget what it said. Tell me again what it's like to feel anything except being cold. Yeah, we called the law enforcement officers, and they found him hanging on a branch a few hundred feet away from the car. 12 years later, it still haunts me sometimes.